My name is Amelia Rhodes. I am 33 years old, living in Chicago. If someone had asked me just a few months ago what my life looked like, I could have listed 1,000 ordinary yet joyful things. Brewing coffee in a sun-filled kitchen. Every morning, sitting beside my husband Nathan while he read the paper and I scribbled down design ideas. Strolling together through Lincoln Park on weekends. Taking short trips to Lake Michigan whenever we needed a breath of fresh air. Never once did I imagine I would so soon become a widow. I met Nathan 8 years ago at a fundraising concert for children with heart disease. Back then, I was a young interior architect, just starting out, volunteering to arrange seats and hang posters. That evening, the orchestra played a symphony whose name I can no longer remember. What stayed with me was the way golden light poured over the concert hall and Nathan, tall and composed, standing at the end of the aisle, his eyes gleaming whenever the music soared. After the program, we happened to end up side by side at the refreshment counter. He struck up a conversation. First, asking what I thought of the concert. I only smiled and told him that what impressed me most wasn't the music, but his smile during it. Nathan laughed, and perhaps that was the moment fate bound us together. He was a neurosurgeon, a profession that sounded both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Yet he never boasted. On the contrary, his humility often surprised me. During our first dates, he didn't recount his surgeries as trophies. Instead, he spoke about his patients, their fears, their hopes, their fragile trust in him. This job reminds me every day how fragile life is, Nathan once told me as we sat on a park bench in Grant Park. That's why I want to live every moment fully. Outside the operating room. A year after we met, we became husband and wife. The wedding was small, held at an old red brick church near Lincoln Park with only family and a handful of close friends. I remember Nathan gripping my hand tightly as we exchanged vows, his blue eyes calm and steady. As if he wasn't just marrying me, but also promising to shield me from every storm life might bring. After the wedding, we bought an old Victorian house on the north side of Chicago. It had a wide porch, arched windows, and a little backyard garden. To me, it was a dream. Even though we had to take out a mortgage and live frugally for several years, we chose it because I believed it would be the foundation of all our future memories. I pictured children running through the garden, while Nathan promised he would build them a treehouse in the old oak at the corner of the yard. We tried everything to have children. 4 rounds of IVF, endless clinic appointments, days of hormone injections that left me exhausted, nights when we lay beside each other, saying nothing but sighing together. After the last attempt failed, we sat in silence for the entire drive home. Nathan's hand rested over mine, quiet yet telling me he was hurting just as much. That night, as we sat on the porch swing, he whispered, "We can still have a beautiful life, Amelia. As long as I have you, that's enough." And I believed him. From then on, we learned to rebuild our dreams. No more cycle charts, no more pressure to conceive. Instead, we traveled once to Seattle for the cherry blossoms, once to Italy so I could finally see the architecture of Florence I had always longed for. Wherever we went, Nathan bought me little notebooks, so you can turn every place you visit into a new design. He would say, my career also began to bloom. With Nathan's encouragement, I opened my own interior design firm and even landed a few major projects. He was the first person to step into the completed rooms, smiling and telling me, "I always knew you'd make it." Our life wasn't perfect, but it was filled with small joys. I still remember how he cooked breakfast. Every morning brewed the coffee while I chose music for the living room. On nights when he came home exhausted after a long surgery, he would find me asleep over my sketchbook, gently lift me onto the bed, tuck the blanket around me, and kiss my forehead. I knew just how blessed I was to have a husband like him. Yet my happiness was never ours alone. There was always another presence shadowing it, my younger sister, Elise. For years my junior, she was beautiful and effortlessly captivating, the kind of woman people noticed instantly. But since childhood, Elise had always been the one to worry our parents. While I studied hard and built a career, Elise hopped from job to job, dove into fleeting romances, and spent beyond her means. Our parents worried, then spoiled her, forgave her, paid off her debts. My relationship with Elise was complicated. I loved her. Yet her jealousy often cut deep. When I was admitted to university, she dropped out. When I got promoted, she sneered. That office work was boring. When I married Nathan, she suddenly took an interest in doctors, as if every achievement of mine was something she had to steal a bit of light from. Nathan would often say, "No matter what, Elise is still your sister. Family matters." So I listened, trying to maintain some fragile connection. Though it was never easy, I never imagined that Elise would be the one to shake the very foundation of my happiness, the most vulnerable moment of all. But that is a story for the months to come. For now at the beginning I still believed I had everything: a gentle husband, a house filled with sunlight, and a future I thought nothing could break. I have always believed that if there was one person my parents worried about more than anyone else, it was Elise, my younger sister. I was 4 years older, but sometimes that gap felt like an entire generation. From childhood, we were nothing alike. I was the quiet child who preferred sitting alone with boxes of colored pencils, cutting out architectural images from old magazines. Elise was the opposite: loud, impulsive, always craving to be the center of attention at every family gathering. When I was accepted into the School of Architecture, Elise dropped out, saying college was too confining and that she wanted to find her own path. That path took her, in turn, to a bar counter, a yoga studio, a nail salon, and eventually a small advertising firm. None of those jobs lasted more than a few months before Elise quit, complained, and left our parents to deal with the consequences. I tried many times to reason with her. "Elise, you can't keep living like this. Mom and Dad can't pay your debts forever." But she would only shake her head, smirk, and reply, "You always think you're right, Amelia. You have no idea what it means to live free." For her, freedom had always meant shirking responsibility. My parents, especially my mother, were endlessly. Every time Elise landed in trouble, fired from a job, breaking up with another boyfriend, falling behind on rent, my mother would sigh and say, "She's still young. She needs more time." And so it went. Elise forgiven, Elise financed. While I, the stable daughter, remained the silent pillar no one ever noticed. The truth is, I never hated Elise. I loved her, though my love was often colored with exhaustion. Nathan was different. He always reminded me, "She's still your sister. Family ties matter." I remember the evenings when Elise came over for dinner. Nathan was always warm, placing extra roasted chicken on her plate, asking her about work. He had a patience I never did. Perhaps it was part of why I loved him even more. Then, one day, Elise dropped a bombshell on our entire family. She was pregnant. It was Thanksgiving. Nathan and I had spent the whole morning preparing dinner. Turkey, pumpkin pie, mashed potatoes. The kitchen smelled rich and comforting, filled with the same anticipation as every year. Elise arrived late, wearing a red leather jacket, her eyes glimmering as though she were guarding a secret. Just as the family sat down at the table, she placed a hand on her stomach and smiled. "I have news. I'm going to be a mom." Oh, silence fell. My mother nearly dropped her soup spoon, while my father blinked repeatedly, as if he couldn't trust his own ears. I sat frozen. Elisa, same person who had sworn she hated children, that motherhood was just a trap for women, was now proudly showing off a pregnancy. Nathan was the first to break the silence. He gave her a gentle smile. Congratulations, Elise. That's truly wonderful news. As for me, I smiled too, but mine tasted bitter. After years of failed attempts, after 4 rounds of IVF now, had to watch my sister get pregnant by accident with a bar musician named Dylan she had known for less than 6 months. My chest clenched tight, but in that instant I swore I would not let jealousy consume me. I promised myself I would be a good aunt, no matter how much it hurt. When Lucas the baby was born, I stood outside the delivery room with a bouquet of sunflowers and a blue knit blanket I had made myself. When I saw his tiny, flushed face, I cried. Not from envy, but from a love so sudden and overwhelming it nearly broke me. In his small eyes, I saw the start of something new, a fragile hope. But Elise was different. From the very first days of motherhood, she seemed overwhelmed. My phone rang constantly at midnight with her pleas. Amelia, he won't stop crying. I don't know what to do. Amelia, I'm exhausted. Can you come stay with him tonight? So I went. Many times I held Lucas through the night so Elise could sleep. I sang softly, rocked him with the kind of love I would never have the chance to give my own child. Nathan often stood in the doorway, watching with a smile tinged by sorrow. He rarely held Lucas, rarely came close. I thought it was because our infertility made it too painful for him. A tease? I only trusted that time would heal him. As for Dylan the father, he was practically absent. Sometimes he was away playing with his bar band, sometimes claiming he had no money. I mostly saw him in pictures Elise posted online, not in real life. Over time, I became more like Lucas's second mother. Elise's friends even joked that the baby resembled me more than her. I didn't deny it. Deep down, I felt a strange happiness every time I held him, kissed his forehead, smelled the faint trace of milk in his hair. Sometimes I spent hours watching him sleep, wondering what our child, mine and Nathan's, would have looked like if fate had been kinder. But from those tender beginnings, fracture began to form in my family. I didn't yet know that my love for this child would soon become the center of a tragedy I could never have foreseen, because Elise, the unstable sister who had always tried to snatch a share of my light, would one day turn Lucas's very existence into a weapon against me. I can still remember that morning, every detail etched into my mind like a film I can never erase. Nathan woke earlier than usual, his hand rubbing lightly at his temple. He said it was just a headache, probably stress from the surgery the night before. I urged him to stay home and rest, but Nathan shook his head, kissed my cheek, and smiled. I have an important operation. I can't miss it. Just a migraine. Don't worry. That was the last time I saw him walk out the door, leather briefcase in hand, his tall, lean figure disappearing at the end of a street lined with golden autumn leaves. By noon, the phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital. I picked up with a flutter of nervousness. Sometimes a nurse would call to ask me to bring something Nathan had forgotten. But the voice on the other end froze the blood in my veins. Dr. Rhodes was rushed to the ER with a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. We're very sorry he didn't make it. I don't remember when the phone slipped from my hand. All I knew was that the house had fallen so silent I could hear my heartbeat pounding like thunder. Death had come too quickly, too brutally. Only this morning he had kissed me goodbye. Now Nathan was gone forever. The funeral unfolded in the cold mist of October. The same red brick church where we once exchanged vows now echoed with mournful organ music. I stood there in a long black dress, trembling hands clutching his portrait. White wreaths lined the aisle. Friends, colleagues, patients, everyone came to grieve. Tears streamed down their faces. I moved like an empty shell, following rituals like a machine. During those days, Elise was nearly absent. She claimed Caleb was sick, that she had no babysitter, and sent only a few half-hearted messages. I didn't blame her. I had no strength left to care. A week later, when sleepless nights still left me hollow and weak on our empty bed, my mother called, "Amelia, today is Caleb's first birthday. You should come. Nathan always said family comes first. Elise really hopes you'll be there." Honestly, I didn't want to go. The thought of forcing a smile amid children's laughter so soon after burying my husband made me suffocate. But when Mother mentioned Nathan family comes first, I found myself nodding that afternoon. I drove to Elise's apartment. On the passenger seat was a gift I had picked for Caleb, a set of wooden building blocks. I stood outside her door. For a few moments, drawing in deep breaths, arranging a smile before ringing the bell. Elise's friend Jenna opened it. Her eyes flickered strangely surprise mixed with tension. "Amelia, you're here? Come in. Everyone's in the backyard." I stepped through a living room strung with pale blue balloons. A happy first birthday. Caleb banner stretched across the wall. Strangers clustered in the kitchen, falling abruptly silent when they saw me. I thought it was just the awkwardness of facing a widow so freshly bereaved in the backyard. Guests held plastic cups, murmuring in uneven conversations. My parents sat at a long table, their expressions strained. When my father spotted me, he shot up and wrapped me in an embrace. "I wasn't sure you'd come, but I'm so glad you did." I only gave him a faint smile and placed the wrapped gift on the table. "Where's Caleb?" "With Elise. She'll bring him out soon," my mother murmured, eyes cast down. Half an hour later, Elise appeared, carrying Caleb in her arms. He was dressed in a tiny shirt and blue bow tie, kicking happily to the sound of clapping. Elise looked dazzling new dress, freshly dyed hair, nothing like the frazzled young mother I was used to seeing. She tapped a spoon against her plastic cup, calling for silence. "Thank you all for coming to Caleb's birthday," Elise began, her voice full of poise. "This past year has been filled with challenges, but also with truths. And today, I can't keep it hidden any longer." My heart lurched. I glanced around the stiff look on my father's face. My mother's eyes lowered. Elise placed a hand on Caleb's head and lifted her chin. "Caleb isn't Dylan's child. He's Nathan's." The air shattered with gasps and whispers. I froze, ears ringing, heart squeezed painfully tight. Elise pressed on, her tone smooth as if rehearsed. "There was a moment of weakness between Nathan and me 2 years ago. We never meant to hurt anyone, but it happened and Caleb is the result. Nathan knew the truth. Before he passed, he changed his will, leaving half the house to his son." She pulled a folded paper from her purse and held it high. "This is the will." Every gaze fell on me, some pitying, some shocked, some curious. My hand clenched around my cup so hard the plastic creaked. And strangely, in that instant, I didn't scream or burst into tears. A smile flickered across my lips, bitter, mocking, incredulous. Elise expected me to collapse. But she didn't know the secret only Nathan and I shared. He had been infertile. For over 2 years, her entire story the moment of weakness. The revised will was nothing but a cheap fabrication. I stepped forward, my voice calm. "May I see the will, Elise?" She faltered for a second before stiffly handing it over. One glance was enough awkward phrasing, a clumsy forged signature. I knew instantly it was fake. But I didn't expose her then. Instead, I folded the paper and returned it. "Thank you. Today is Caleb's day. We'll talk later." I turned and walked away, leaving behind a trail of murmurs and confused stares. Only when the car door closed did I finally laugh, a broken, choking laugh, tears spilling down my face. Not joy, but bitterness. My sister had truly dared to weave such a monstrous lie. Right over the still green grave of Nathan, and in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning of the battle. That night, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of red wine untouched on the table. The house, once so warm, was now filled only with the ticking of the clock and shadows stretching across the corners. I could still hear Elise's voice echoing. In my head, every word like a knife twisting deeper. "Caleb is Nathan's son." We had a moment of weakness, if not for the bitter smile that curled on my lips. I might have thought I was going insane. My own sister, in the very days I was mourning, had staged a story of betrayal and an illegitimate child. The pain wasn't just the light, was the cruelty behind it. But Elise had no idea. She didn't know that 2 years earlier, Nathan had undergone a difficult surgery. I remember that day vividly. Nathan was resilient, never one to complain, but he had been quietly enduring sharp pains in his lower abdomen for weeks. When I finally noticed and forced him to see a doctor, the diagnosis was varicocele condition that could seriously affect his health. The surgery itself wasn't complicated, but during the procedure, the doctor advised sterilization to avoid complications and recurrence. I sat in the waiting room, my heart racing, until the surgeon called me in for consent. The decision was agonizing, especially after years of struggling with infertility. But Nathan held my hand, his gaze steady. "I want to live long with you more than I want to gamble on a possibility that was already so slim." I cried, but nodded. From that moment, the chance of having biological children was gone. It was painful, but also a kind of release. No more calendars, no more needles, no more shattered hopes. We learned to smile again, even if a scar remained deep inside. Elise didn't know. No one did, except me and the doctor, and Nathan, always cautious, had thought ahead. After the surgery, sitting outside with an ice pack on his lap, he told me, "I don't believe Elise will stop. There's something about her that unsettles me. One day, she might do something reckless. I want to be prepared." I laughed back then, thinking he was overreacting, but Nathan was serious. He arranged a meeting with our family lawyer, the same one who helped us when we bought the house. He laid it all out. The late-night texts Elise had sent, the time she showed up at his office in a short dress with a suggestive smile. "I don't want Amelia to face this alone if something ever happens," he told the lawyer. And so he began. Keeping everything: medical records, the official will, even notes about every time Elise crossed the line. He called it his disaster prevention file. I teased him for being paranoid. But now, sitting in the empty house, I realized Nathan had seen farther than I ever did. After Caleb's birthday party, I couldn't sleep. I opened the safe in Nathan's study, where he kept important documents. When I pulled out the thick file, my hands trembled. Every page was proof of how he had prepared for me. The official, notarized will, leaving everything to me. Not a single word about any child out of wedlock. His medical records clearly documenting the surgery and test results proving he could no longer father children. Nathan's meticulous notes, written like a diary. Elise called at 11 p.m., asking if I was alone. Elise touched my shoulder as Amelia left the room. I set a clear boundary, but she laughed and said I was too serious. And finally, a thick envelope, labeled, "For Amelia, if needed." I sat down and opened it. Inside were pages written in Nathan's hand. "Amelia, if you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there. I hope you'll never need these, but I want to make sure you are protected. I know how deeply you love your family and how often your kindness becomes your wound. If Elise or anyone tries to take advantage, remember this: the truth is on your side. I've left every piece of evidence you'll need, and I leave you a love that nothing can erase. Live on, my love. Be strong as you always are." I read his words again and again, tears smudging the ink. Nathan could no longer protect me with his presence, but he still shielded me with preparation, with a love that stretched beyond death itself. The next morning, I folded the documents neatly and placed them in my bag. I knew I would have to confront Elise, not only to defend myself, but to protect Nathan's honor. He was no longer here to speak, so I had to be his voice. But deep down, I also knew this wasn't just about Elise's envy or spite. Behind it all, there had to be debts, desperation, or some darker collapse. I needed to uncover the whole truth, and I swore, with all my love and loyalty to Nathan, that I would not let his name be tarnished by lies. Elise might be my sister, but this time she had gone far beyond the line. The next morning, I carried the heavy bag of documents out of the house. Early winter in Chicago was sharp and chilly, thin fog settling over the stone-paved sidewalks, my breath rising in pale clouds. I walked faster than usual, weighed down, not just by the files, but by a strange feeling as though I was fulfilling a mission Nathan himself had entrusted to me. One he had prepared for long before. My destination was the office of Mr. Richard Hale, our longtime family lawyer. Nathan trusted him completely. I still remember years ago when we signed the contract for the Victorian house. Richard had been there, reading every small print aloud and explaining it in that steady, deep voice of his. Nathan used to joke, "If there's anyone besides me I'd trust to protect you, it's Richard." When I entered, the secretary immediately rose, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Mrs. Rhodes, my condolences. Mr. Hale is expecting you." Richard, now in his 60s, had hair white as snow, but carried himself with firm strength. He stood, walked around his desk, and clasped my hand tightly. "Amelia, I am so sorry." Nathan was one of the best men I've ever known. He always thought of others first. The words stung my eyes with tears. I nodded slightly and placed the heavy bag on his dark wooden desk. "You're right, Richard," Nathan thought further ahead than I ever imagined. "Please, look at this." I opened the bag, laying out each piece of evidence: the notarized will, the medical records, Nathan's diary pages, and the private letter he had left me. Richard adjusted his glasses, reading carefully. Each time he turned a page, he exhaled deeply, shaking his head slowly. He anticipated this exact scenario, he murmured. "Amelia, what your sister did at Caleb's birthday, let's speak. Plainly that was fraud and forgery. If you choose, we can file charges immediately. The evidence is undeniable." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "I know, but Elise is my sister. And then there's Caleb." I hesitated, speaking his name aloud for the first time since the party. "That child is innocent. I don't want him growing up with the memory of his mother being sent to prison by his own aunt." Richard removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. "I understand, but Amelia, you must also protect yourself. You cannot allow those lies to stand, nor let Nathan's honor be dragged through the mud. The surest way is to bring everything into the light." Tears burned my eyes. "Isn't there another way? Something that can protect me and Nathan's name without destroying Elise completely?" He paused, thoughtful. "If you truly want a less public path, then I suggest hiring a private investigator. We need to uncover Elise's current situation, her debts, her ties to Dylan, everything. Once we know the truth, you can confront her directly, force her to back down without the courts." I was silent, weighing it. The thought of investigating my own sister was painful, but that pain was nothing compared to hearing people call Nathan a cheater. That I could not allow. "Do you know someone trustworthy?" I asked. Richard nodded. "Yes. Frank Donovan. Former detective, now private investigator. Discreet, efficient. I'll call him." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I met Frank in Richard's office. He was around 50, stocky, with a clipped Boston accent and sharp eyes. He sat down, listening intently as I recounted everything: Nathan's death, Caleb's birthday, Elise's announcement, and the file I had found in the safe. Frank scribbled notes, occasionally glancing up to ask terse questions. What's Elise doing for income right now? And Dylan, do you know where he is? Any mention of debts? I shook my head at most of them. I realized, with a pang, how little I actually knew about Elise's current life. Over the past year, I had poured myself into Caleb rocking him, soothing him to sleep while his mother drifted in and out, calling only to complain. Frank closed his notebook. I'll dig in. But let me be blunt, someone who invents a story, like the one you've described, who goes as far as forging a will, there's always a financial motive. Don't fool yourself into thinking this is just sisterly spite. This is fraud, plain and simple. My chest tightened, but I nodded. I do. What you have too. I just want the whole truth. As he stood to leave, Frank gave me one last look. You loved your husband very much, didn't you? The question startled me with its intimacy. I managed a sad smile. So much that now, even without him, I have to keep fighting for him. Frank gave a curt nod, as if he understood, then walked out. That night, I returned to the silent house and turned on the living room lights. The file still lay open on the table. Sitting down, I pulled out Nathan's letter once more, reading it again. His words felt like his voice whispering. In my ear, be strong. The truth will protect you. The ache of loss still cut deep, but now a new feeling began to rise strength. Nathan had left me every tool I needed. My task now was to use them not only to protect myself, but to preserve the honor of the man I loved. Tomorrow, Frank would begin the investigation, and I knew that whatever he uncovered might hurt even more. But I was ready. Elise had begun with a lie. Now it was my turn to enter, the battle armed with the truth. The days after my first meeting with Frank drifted by as slowly as mist. The house was so silent I could hear the faint crack of the calendar page whenever wind slipped through the stained glass window. I gathered Nathan's belongings into a wooden box, carefully folding his white lab coat that still smelled faintly of soap. Every motion felt like a ritual, a way to keep myself from breaking. I knew Frank was tracking Elise's trail, but waiting was always the hardest part. On Thursday morning, my phone buzzed. Frank's voice was curt. I've got preliminary results. 3 o'clock, Hale's office. When the call ended, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, my hand stilled around a cup of coffee gone cold. Something inside me sank fear that what I had suspected all along was about to be confirmed. Richard, at Hale's office, sat inside an old brownstone on a maple-lined street. The waiting room smelled of leather and old paper, hushed like an archive. Richard met me at the door, his eyes steady, as if ready to catch me should I stumble. Frank was already seated, a black folder swollen with documents before him. Thank you for being punctual, Frank said, opening the folder. Let's get straight to it. He slid a stack of papers toward me. The first line struck me. Current debt, $68,400. I swallowed hard. Below it was a breakdown for maxed-out credit cards, a high-interest personal loan, and most notably hospital bills tied to Caleb. I glanced at Richard, who nodded reassuringly, as if to say, keep going. The boy has a mild congenital heart murmur, Frank explained, his voice softening. Not life-threatening, but it requires regular monitoring, medication, and occasional minor procedures. Costs aren't cheap. She's already 3 bills behind. He turned the page. Next, eviction notice. 5 months, unpaid rent. Deadline end of this month, and here too utility shut-off warnings. My fists clenched. The picture sharpened. This wasn't just envy or spite, it was someone sinking, flailing in debt, terrified of being cast out onto the street with her child. And Dylan. I asked. Frank pulled out a thinner file. Left Chicago 8 months ago, now in Austin, Texas, playing in a bar band. No legal custody claims, no fixed support. I tracked sporadic transfers through apps, averaging under $150 a month and inconsistent. Beyond that, he paused. Public records from Travis County. A bar fight awaiting hearing. No major priors, but, plainly, this isn't a stable man. I leaned back, a chill racing down my spine. Caleb had not chosen his father, and Elise, no matter how infuriating, was clutching a fireball. "Now, what you most need," Frank said, sliding another packet toward me. Messages between Elise and her friend Jenna. I pulled them from her cloud backup. She used the same recovery email for her social media. Weak security. He cleared his throat and read slowly. Bridget. Amelia is always the princess. Nathan's dead. At least I deserve something. That house is worth over $900,000 now. If I say Caleb is Nathan's, they won't dare make a scene. And the Will Marco says he can trace the signature from that hospital gala program Nathan signed. All we need is a stamped page, and she cave. My chest tightened. Who's? Marco, freelance designer, works in print advertising. No clear evidence he knew the full extent. But here's an email of him sending Elise a draft codicil. The issue is Frank tipped his head toward Richard. Richard pushed his glasses up his nose. This forgery is crude. First, the language doesn't match the standard form we used for Nathan the structure. The legal citations, even the Oxford. Commas. Second, the notarization cites the wrong state law Indiana statutes, not Illinois. Third, the notary ID belongs to someone who died last year. A simple public check exposes it. Relief mixed with bitterness. She never thought that far, I murmured. Voice raspy. Frank closed the file. Elise's motive is survival. She texted Jenna, pressure her to pay up to avoid embarrassment. Exact words, she settled to avoid the spectacle. She assumed you'd stay silent while grieving, and a DNA test. I asked, my hand trembling. Frank shook his head. Asterix mentioned once. Elise replied, no need. She's grieving. I'll say it would traumatize the boy. The will is enough. The room grew heavy, the air leaden. I stared at the desk's scratched wood grain, worn by years of Richard tapping his pen. I thought of Nathan, his calm in the O, his way of always choosing truth, even when it hurt. Elise had shoved me to the cliff's edge. But she was right in one thing. I would do everything to keep this from becoming a circus. Not out of fear, but... For Caleb, Richard folded his hands. His voice was firm. 2 options. 1. We issue a legal warning immediately with copies of the real will. Notifying her the next step is criminal charges, fraud, and forgery. 2. You confront her privately with her consent to record, secure her admission. Then force a full retraction, apology, and written pledge never to repeat it. I lean toward the second, if you want to preserve any thread of family and spare. The child a lifelong scar. So do I whispered. But I won't compromise on the truth or Nathan's honor. Frank nodded. If you choose confrontation, prepare to record. But Illinois law requires all-party consent. You must state it clearly at the start. Choose a space you control. 2 chairs, low table, water. No third parties. Arrange documents. In order medical records, the true will, the legal flaws in her forgery, then the messages. Let her contradict herself before you reveal proof. I nodded, thanking them both. Something solid was rising in Minot cold armor, but a framework, strong enough to hold me steady in the storm. When I stepped out, the sky had turned to lead. Snowflakes scattered on the stone steps. I paused, zipped my coat, breathed in the sharp cold that burned my tongue. In my mind, I rearranged everything again. Like tidying a new room, which evidence to show first, which questions to ask, where. To retreat if emotions surged at home, I prepared the living room. I pulled the low table near the window, placed 2 chairs opposite, set 2 glasses of water. I tested the small recorder. The red light blinked. On the table, Nathan's file lay neat, a silent reassurance. I sat down, typed a message to Elise. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my house. We need to talk. Just us. Message sent. I set the phone face down, leaned back in the chair. Outside, the city lights flickered on. In that moment, I could almost hear Nathan's voice in memory, "The truth will protect you." I nodded into the empty air. Tomorrow, the door would open. And this time, I would be the one to step forward for myself, for Caleb. And for the man no longer at the head of the table, yet still protecting me in another way, through a file and through a love that will not fade. The next day, when the clock struck exactly 2, the doorbell rang. I had been waiting for this moment for a long week, ever since that disastrous birthday party. The living room I had arranged the night before looked as neat as a boardroom. A low table, 2 chairs facing each other, glasses of water, the recorder. The thick file sat on the table, closed, not flaunted. I opened the door. Elise stood there in a new beige knit dress, her hair lightly curled. She lifted her chin, her eyes defiant. "You look calmer than I expected," she said, lips curling into a half smile. "Good. Come in." I stepped aside and let her into the living room. When we sat down, I pointed to the small recorder on the table. "Elise, I want to record this conversation, so we both have a copy. Do you agree?" She hesitated a moment, then nodded. "Fine. I have nothing to hide." I pressed the button. The red light blinked. My voice was steady. "Today is November 13th. I, Amelia Rhodes, am speaking with my sister, Elise Rhodes. This conversation is being recorded with the consent of both parties." I looked her in the eye. "Elise, do you agree?" "Yes." Her tone was firm, though her eyes flickered. I folded my hands on the table, leaving a pause. "All right. Then, tell it from the beginning. What exactly are you claiming about your relationship with Nathan?" Elise drew a breath, launching into her story as though rehearsed. "About 2 years ago, Nathan and I, we had an encounter, not planned. He told me his marriage wasn't happy, that you were too busy with work. We met a few times at the Mandarin Hotel, and Caleb was the result. Before he died, Nathan promised to provide for his son. The will I produced proves that." I nodded slowly, masking the fury rising in me. "Which hotel did you say?" "Mandarin Oriental." "Which room?" "Blinked high floor. I don't remember the number." "Which days?" Tuesdays. Sometimes Thursdays." I kept pressing. "And what did he usually order from room service?" "You know Nathan was particular about food, don't you?" Her brow furrowed, her rhythm faltering. "Steak, I think. Was allergic to black pepper. Did you know that?" My voice was calm, head tilted. Her face stiffened. I didn't notice that detail. I let the silence grow heavy. Then, deliberately, I opened the file and pulled out a document. "Elise, 2 years ago, Nathan had surgery and a vasectomy. Here are the medical records signed by the surgeon. After that, he could no longer father children." "How do you explain this?" The color drained from her face. She snatched the paper, skimming it with trembling hands. "This could be forged." "No," I cut in, firm. "This is the original. And the doctor is prepared to testify." I laid out the official will next. "Here is the real, notarized will, kept in Richard Hale's office. What you produced was a forgery, wrong language, wrong signature. Do you want to know the penalty for will forgery in Illinois? Up to 5 years in prison." Elise's fingers dug into the edge of the table, her lips quivering, her eyes flashing. But I wasn't done. I placed a set of printed messages on the table. "And here are your texts with Jenna. If I say Caleb is Nathan's, she won't dare make it public." We just need a will, and she'll fold. Those are your words, Elise. Do you want me to read the part about Marco helping you fake the signature? Elise shot to her feet, her chair nearly toppling. Enough. Where did you get all this? I held her gaze, my voice unwavering. From the truth, Elise, everything you built has collapsed. She stood frozen for a few seconds, breathing hard. Then, suddenly, her shoulders shook and tears spilled down. Not the manipulative kind, but raw, broken sobs that tore the mask away. I don't know what to do anymore, Amelia. Dylan's gone. The debts keep piling up. Caleb's medicine is so expensive. The landlord's threatening to throw us out. I was desperate. I went still, my heart twisting and loosening at once. For all my rage, I saw the truth behind the vile scheme. Elise was just a woman drowning in debt and fear. But you chose the worst way, I said, voice thick. You trampled on Nathan, someone who was always kind to you. You shamed the memory of my husband. Elise buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I know, I was wrong. I just thought if you believed it, you'd give me something. I didn't think you'd dig this deep. I switched off the recorder and sat in silence. Outside, autumn leaves rustled, as though time itself was listening. I looked at my sister not with burning anger anymore, but with something heavier. Pure, crushing disappointment. Tomorrow, I said quietly, you'll come with me to Richard's office. You'll sign a full confession, admit everything, and pledge never to repeat it. If not, I will hand all this to the police. Understand? Elise lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes wide with panic. Amelia, you won't send me to prison, will you? I stared at her for a long time. What I want most is to protect Nathan's memory. But you will face consequences. Can't promise what the future holds. It depends on you. Elise, the room fell silent. I could see it clearly. The wall of lies Elise had built had crumbled completely. But what remained? Her despair, her debts, her child, these were the storms I now had to face. After Elise broke down crying in my living room, the air seemed to freeze. I watched her shoulders shake in small, helpless tremors. For years, I had known Elise only as proud, chin held high, walking through life as though the world owed her something. But that day, before me, she wasn't a manipulator. She looked like a lost child, suddenly realizing the game she had built had collapsed. I let the silence stretch. The only sound was the tick of the clock, steady and merciless. Inside, I was torn apart. One part of me wanted to hurl the file into her face and call the police immediately. But another part, the part with Caleb's innocent eyes, his small, trusting smile, held me back. Elise, I began, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I could hand this entire file to the police right now. Do you understand the consequences? Forging a will, fabricating an affair, you could face prison. She shook her head desperately, tears streaking down. I don't want to go to jail. I just wanted a place for Caleb. Money for his medicine. I was so desperate, Amelia. I was wrong. Please. I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath. When I opened them, I placed both hands on the table, fingers interlaced. Won't take this to the police. But there will be conditions. Elise's head snapped up, her gaze a mix of hope and fear. First, I said, each word clear, you will sign a written statement admitting you fabricated everything about Nathan. That Caleb is not his child. That the so-called will was forged. You'll sign it in front of a lawyer with witnesses. That record will be kept permanently. Elise hesitated, then nodded faintly. All right, I'll sign. Second, I continued, you will apologize publicly. Not in front of strangers, but at least to our parents and family. You humiliated Nathan's memory in front of them. You will correct it in front of them." Her face twisted in discomfort, but I didn't wait for her protest. "Third," I leaned toward her, "I will set up a trust fund for Caleb. Money from it can only be used for his medical care and education. You will not touch it. It will be overseen by me and a financial manager. Do you understand?" Elise's eyes widened. You still want to help the boy? Caleb is innocent. He deserves care. But I will not hand money directly to you anymore. I can't trust you." Tears welled in her eyes again, this time a mix of relief and shame. "Thank you, not finished," I said, my tone cooling. "Fourth condition, you will attend therapy and financial counseling. I will check. If you abandon it, if you ever repeat any deception, I will not hesitate to take you to court. And then, no one will be able to save you." Elise was silent, her lips pressed tight. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the old pride crushed under the weight of fear. At last, she nodded weakly. "I agree, I'll do it." I leaned back, exhaling. A part of me felt hollow, another part relieved. What I had offered was no acquittal, it was a narrow path for Elise to walk instead of total collapse. The next day, Elise and I sat together in Richard Hale's office. Golden light streamed through the tall windows, falling across the dark wood table. With trembling hands, Elise signed the confession. I looked at her and saw no arrogance left, only a woman terrified at the edge of ruin. Richard nodded, placing the document securely in his safe. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, his gaze steady on Elise, "what you did is a serious crime. But your sister chose to protect you. Do not take this chance lightly." Elise lowered her head, whispering, "Yes." 4. The first time I felt a sliver of justice. Nathan, if he were here, would be content knowing the truth had been affirmed. That night, alone at home, I took Nathan's letter once more from its envelope. Its familiar handwriting blurred as my eyes stung. "I leave you every piece of evidence you might need, and I leave you a love that nothing can erase." I traced the lines with my fingertips, whispering, "I did it, Nathan. I defended you. But I also chose a way for Caleb not to suffer for his mother's sins." Outside, the early winter wind rustled through the garden. The house was quiet, but for the first time in weeks, the silence wasn't frightening. It felt like a whispered promise. The storms were beginning to pass. When Elise left Richard's office, she paused at the door, her eyes red and swollen. "Amelia," I turned to her, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But thank you for thinking of Caleb. I'll try to change." I looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Not for me, Elise, for your son." In my eyes, there was still anger, still hurt. But deep beneath it flickered a fragile hope that this time, my sister might truly start again. That Saturday, I prepared dinner at home. Nothing elaborate, just lasagna, the dish Nathan had always cooked so well, and a simple green salad. But for me, this wasn't a casual family meal. This was a tribunal, a family court of sorts, where truth would be laid bare, where Elise would face our parents, and where I would draw new boundaries. When my parents arrived, my mother carried her usual homemade apple pie. Yet she seemed restless, her eyes darting around as if trying to anticipate what was about to happen. "Amelia, I don't understand why you insisted on calling Elise tonight. She's been crying for days, saying you're forcing her." I cut her off, my voice steady. "Mom, tonight everyone will hear it from Elise herself. I only ask one thing. Please let her speak for herself." Mother pressed her lips together, clearly uneasy. My father was silent, his hand resting firmly on my shoulder in quiet support. At exactly 7 o'clock, Elise walked in. She wore a plain white blouse and dark jeans stripped of her usual flair. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from tears. I noticed her clenching her hands tightly, as though holding herself together. When everyone was seated, I switched on the small recorder. At the center of the table, for everyone's peace of mind, this conversation is being recorded with the consent of all present. Elise, it's your turn now. The room sank into heavy silence. Elise swallowed hard, staring at her plate. Her voice rasped. I lied. Caleb is not Nathan's child. He never betrayed Amelia. Everything I said was something I made up. What? My mother gasped, eyes wide. I forged a will, Elise continued, her voice trembling. I asked someone to fake Nathan's signature, and I presented it at Caleb's birthday. I only wanted to pressure Amelia to share her assets because I was drowning in debt, afraid of losing our home. I'm sorry. No one spoke for several seconds. My mother sat frozen, her hands trembling. So badly she knocked over her spoon. My father gripped his glass tightly, his face flushed. Finally, his voice broke through. Hoarse and raw. Elise, do you realize what you've done? You defiled Nathan's memory and wounded your sister when she had just buried her husband. Elise sobbed, choking on her words. I know I was wrong. I was desperate. I thought if I did this, I'd have money for Caleb. I didn't think it would spiral like this. My mother finally exhaled shakily, wiping her tears. My God, Elise, why didn't you tell me? Why create such a monstrous lie? Because you couldn't give me $300,000, Elise blurted, her voice breaking. That's what I needed. I thought this was the only way out. Mother lowered her head, silent. I watched her, seeing the fracture in her trust. I set down my spoon, looking around the table. I brought Elise to Richard's office. She signed a written confession. I haven't taken this to court for Caleb's sake. But there are conditions. A trust fund for the boy. Therapy, financial counseling. Elise must change. If not, she will face the consequences. Mother turned toward me, her voice pleading. Amelia, you can't be so harsh forever. Elise is still your sister. I clenched my fists against the table. Mom, do you know what I had to hear? Elise stood before a crowd and said Nathan cheated. On me, I had just lost my husband. Do you understand the cruelty of that? I forgave Elise for Caleb's sake, not because I can ever forget. My father nodded gravely. Amelia is right. We've covered for Elise too many times. That ends today. Elise choked out. I'll try. I swear I will. I looked at her, unsure how much I could believe, but at least for the first time. Elise bowed her head in front of our parents rather than deflecting blame. When the meal drew to a close, my mother rose and embraced Elise, both of them in tears. I just want you to change, she whispered. I don't want to lose another child. I stood watching, my heart twisting, part pity, part exhaustion. My father came and pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you, Amelia. You've been stronger than any of us. My eyes stung, but I only nodded. Elise was the last to leave. Before stepping out the door, she turned to me. Amelia, do you think one day you could forgive me? Paused. Then answered honestly, I don't know, but I'm willing to wait and see how you change. Forgiveness doesn't come from words, Elise. It comes from actions. She bowed her head, then walked away. When the door closed, silence reclaimed the house. I cleared the table, my eyes resting on the small recorder. Inside it now was the entire conversation, proof that the truth had been spoken, that Nathan's memory was no longer tainted. I stepped out into the garden. The night air was cold, but late-season chrysanthemums still bloomed proudly under the porch light. I whispered into the darkness, Nathan, rest easy. The truth has been restored too. You. The wind stirred softly, as if in reply. 1 year later, my back garden was green again. Tulips and daffodils pushed up from the soil that had slept all winter, their sharp shoots piercing the damp earth as if nothing could hold back life itself. I stood on the wooden porch, a cup of tea in my hands, listening to the faint chime of the wind bells. Chicago was still Chicago, the sharp winds off the lake, brick-lined streets glistening with rain, and skies scrubbed clean each time sunlight broke through after a storm. People say time heals. I'm not sure, but time does teach you how to carry pain and still keep walking. That first winter after Nathan died was a blank stretch of days. I survived by habit, waking, working, lighting a candle in the living room. At dusk, reading his letter on sleepless nights. Then spring arrived one morning without warning. I suddenly noticed the birds had returned, that the damp smell of wood in the house no longer felt so cold. Around that same time, Caleb's trust fund began to work as intended. Hospital bills were paid on time, his heart checkups went smoothly. The doctor said his murmur was softer now, still needing monitoring but with a good outlook. I held him in the waiting room, breathed in the scent of baby shampoo in his hair, and felt a fragile peace pass through me. Elise went to therapy steadily for 6 months. At first out of fear, later because she began to realize she needed it. Financial counseling taught her how to track every expense, how to call the hospital to negotiate, how to ask about patient aid programs. She found work as a receptionist at a small dental clinic 15 minutes walk from home. The hours were steady, the pay modest but stable. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment, mall, full of light, with rent she could manage. On tired days, she would text me short messages. I didn't borrow today. Just wanted to tell you I paid off one card. I'd read it, put down the phone, and feel a little lighter. My parents, especially my mother, needed more time. Years of protecting Elise had grown into reflex. But after that confession dinner, she learned to ask differently. Did you talk to your financial advisor? Instead of how much do you need me to send? My father grew gentler, often stopping by my place on weekends with a bag of tomatoes. He had grown in a wooden planter on his balcony. We spoke of Nathan more often not with clenched tears, but with small memories, how he laughed when he won at chess, how he always added milk to scrambled eggs to make them softer. As for me, I returned to design work slowly. I took fewer projects, choosing small apartments with stories to tell over lavish contracts. I learned to say no, a word I had rarely used before. I rearranged my life the way I would a room. Fewer objects, more open space. In a new notebook, I wrote my own boundaries. No work calls after 8 p.m. No rescuing problems that weren't mine. No silence when the truth was twisted. I even prepared an emergency file for my self-important papers. Passwords, contacts continuing Nathan's legacy of always be prepared. 6 months after losing him, I founded the Nathan Rhodes Foundation. At first, it was only meant to fund a small scholarship for disadvantaged medical students like the intern Nathan once mentored. But donations began to arrive quietly. A group of former patients sent a card with a check. A colleague left an unmarked envelope. The foundation grew into a program that offered emergency aid to families of children in cardiac care, a few nights in a motel near the hospital, parking fees, or simply a decent meal after a long day of waiting. Each time I approved an expense. I remembered the night Elise shakily signed her confession and reminded myself that kindness only matters when joined with discipline and transparency. I met Daniel at a fall fundraiser. He was a music instructor, invited to open the evening on piano. He wasn't strikingly handsome, only gentle-eyed, with a habit of tilting his head slightly when listening. After the program, he approached me and said he admired the way I had lit the old brick wall from below, like adding a bass line to the room. We laughed and later shared hot apple cider on the porch. Daniel asked little about Nathan, but just enough for me to know he respected the presence of the man who had shaped my life. At our next meeting, he brought a short, wordless piece of music, sang for evenings that feel too noisy. We walked along the lake a few times, not holding hands, never rushing. I told him my heart still carried a deep stitch. He nodded. Music needs rests too. Without them, a melody is just noise. That answer was enough to let me take another step forward. Caleb turned to this month. His birthday party was held in a nearby park with only family and a few friends. A small cake, 2 candles that took him several tries to blow out. I snapped a photo of him clutching a blue balloon running unsteadily across the grass. Elise stood beside him, tired but calm. No one mentioned the past in front of Caleb. We left the past where it belonged, like a heavy stone at the bottom of a lake still there, still weighty, but no longer disturbing the surface. Tonight, after washing the dishes, I opened Nathan's old envelope again. The paper was soft from being touched too many times. I read the final lines once more. Keep living, my love. Be strong as you are. I placed the letter back in its wooden box, lit a candle on the windowsill, and stepped onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and new leaves. I thought of all I had learned this past year, that love can still protect us even when the one we love is gone. That boundaries are how we keep our kindness from being exploited. That documents and evidence don't dry out emotion, they give you as a foundation on which compassion can stand tall. I don't know what the future holds for me and Daniel. I don't know if one day I'll be able to say the word forgive to Elise without stumbling over it. I only know that tomorrow I'll take Caleb to his heart checkup. Stop by the used bookstore for a picture book about trains, water the herbs. In my kitchen window, send the confirmation email for the Foundation's first scholarship to a second-year medical student. Small things stacked together, making a rhythm of life that is quiet but steady. Before going back inside, I turned once more to the garden. The new shoots trembled in the breeze. And I whispered, as I always did on the stillest nights, Nathan, you're still here. Not waiting for a sign from the sky. Just knowing that love, truth, and preparation, the 3 things he left me, were still holding up my life, each day, quietly. And that was enough. Perhaps the most beautiful thing after this journey was not Elise signing her confession, nor the founding of the Nathan Rhodes Foundation. It was the moment Amelia learned how to stand firm in her loss. She protected her husband's memory, upheld the truth, and still opened a new path for Caleb, the innocent child. This story reminds us that true love does not disappear when someone leaves. It continues to protect, continues to lift us up if we are brave enough to live fully with truth and compassion. Thank you for staying with Snail's story until the very end. If this story touched you, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe. So each week, we can meet again through journeys that are heartfelt, healing, and full of hope.